Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Kathryn, and that was a very, very entertaining Chinese Grand Prix weekend, which are you also shocked that a sprint weekend managed to be both entertaining in the sprint race and the Grand Prix race? Because I sure was. And I also want to start this episode off by once again apologizing to Toto Wolff for being wrong about Kimi Antonelli. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is how we ended up in a documentary about Kimi Antonelli's journey to joining the Mercedes Formula One team by being very wrong on the internet right after Lewis Hamilton announced that he was leaving Mercedes for Ferrari. So oops. Now, before we dive in, and I have a lot of things to talk about regarding the Chinese Grand Prix weekend as a whole. Tonight, as I am filming this, is the Oscars. They are tonight. Formula One, the movie, is currently nominated for, hilariously, Best Picture, Best Film Editing, Best Sound, and Best Visual Effects. If they win anything, I might do a little short thing about it, but congratulations to those who are nominated, and of course to Lewis Hamilton for being part of an Oscar-nominated production, and also all the drivers who were, in the movie that is nominated for an Oscar, which that movie is hilarious. And looking at the Best Picture nominees that it is up against, I'm just like, oh, okay. One of these things is clearly not like the others, but okay, cool. And speaking of the production company behind F1 the movie, Apple Films, I do reluctantly have to say a couple of nice things about Apple TV and the Apple TV experience that I have had so far with the first two Formula One races of the season. Now, obviously, I do not appreciate having been kicked out of my F1 TV account and having to, go through a whole other song and dance. And thankfully, I already had an Apple TV subscription, so I didn't have to go buy a new one. I'm already spending the money. But I will say that, and F1 TV has this too, and I don't know if it's different in the F1 TV interface as it is in the Apple TV interface, but I really like the enhanced driver data stream option that you can watch, because I like having multiple screens up when I'm watching sports at all times. If I'm watching a basketball game, I will have live stats up on my computer, or many live stats up on my computer. I watch a lot of sports, and I watch a lot of sports stats as well. So to have that second screen, I'm going to put up a picture that I took last night of the data tracker that I watched that I really enjoyed. Number one, because it always shows the interval between drivers. Sometimes the broadcast will go back and forth between gap to leader and the interval gap. I am a 100% fan of the interval. I do not care what the gap to leader is. I know that can sometimes be important, but it's not important to me. So at the very least, I have that in the data tracker, which also goes out to 3 decimals again, which is something that we're still missing in the main F1 TV broadcast. So I hope they bring that back. But if you are missing all of those decimal points, especially, when drivers are getting within 1 second, so they can use overtake mode / DRS, you have that on one of the alternative monitors. So it still exists. We can be happy about that. I will say it was very difficult to change broadcast on my phone when I was listening to it while not in the house, which was kind of annoying. The Apple TV app isn't the best on the phone, but obviously on my TV and my iPad, I have had no problems. That said, I still don't think that this Apple TV agreement is going to be the growth driver of Formula One in the United States that Stefano Domenicali thinks it is. Stefano Domenicali doesn't listen to me. I don't understand why, but I guess this is the world we just have to live in. Now, to the most important thing. Kimi Antonelli won his first Formula One race, and I am so excited for him. Mercedes still has some issues getting off the start line big time, and Kimi, that was the best start he can manage in his 3 attempts so far this season, but he was just gone after George did him a solid and fought with the Ferraris for basically 2/3 of the race, which gave him a chance to scamper away, which was great. It was very entertaining for the fact that I was watching this race at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm still very, very tired. I've had a very long weekend, guys, but also, woke us all back up, if you were watching in the States at, oh, dark, that, he gave us that little heart attack when he went off on lap 53, and that just, I was sitting there like, Kimi, don't you dare. Just get to the finish line for the love of all that is holy. And for the statistical record-breaking portion that that I just love to look at and love looking at all that data, Kimi Antonelli at 19 years and 201 days is the youngest Grand Prix pole sitter. He broke Sebastian Vettel's record of 21 years, 72 days at Monza in 2008. So that record lasted a minute, and it was one of the few that Max Verstappen did not already own. Which Max Verstappen, if you don't know and you haven't seen our episode of going through the record book portion of Max Verstappen's Wikipedia page after the 2023 F1 season, Max has, it's either a Max record, a Lewis record, a Michael Schumacher record that is about to be broken by Lewis Hamilton, or a random record from someone obscure. But they are the biggest names in F1 records. And Kimi is also going on to another list. He is the second youngest race winner at 19 years, 6 months, and 18 days. Max has that record right now at 18 years, 7 months, and 15 days. So unlike some of Max's other records that Max set when he was 17 years old, this one can still be broken one day by a very young Formula One driver. So that is just something to keep an eye on, especially for those, fresh new 18-year-olds that are coming in. And then, of course, Kimi Antonelli is the 116th race winner in Formula One and the first Italian to win a Formula One race in 20 years. He also got the youngest hat trick, but could not get a Grand Slam because Lewis did lead some of the laps in the Chinese Grand Prix. So it was a great day if your name is Kimi Antonelli, and if your name is Kimi Antonelli's dad, who was, very stressed out in that Mercedes garage, but they're all having a happy time. Toto Wolff was thrilled to see his, Mercedes sweep of the podium, if we want to be technical, just, Photoshop Lewis out of his Ferrari pajamas and put him back in a Mercedes race suit. And it is a clean sweep of Mercedes. Now, of course, George finished P2. He had some great racing with Lewis and Charles Leclerc, which I think is really the main thing that we've been dying for in the DRS era, so to speak, of the last generation of cars, was to have more. For the drivers to have more of an ability to follow each other closely on track and then overtake each other, really easily. And that is something that Ferrari and Mercedes right now are doing really well, that other teams are still working on. And yeah, it's a little bit gimmicky still. I still don't really know how I feel about the overtake button and those like extra 8 joules that you get, when you're trying to overtake, and just the how difficult it is to stick those overtakes and maintain those and scamper off. And that's obviously a lot more difficult than it used to be. But I think that we're trending in the right direction. Obviously, Max Verstappen, that's the biggest name of people who are unhappy. But I think that a lot of his unhappiness comes from the fact that his car, his power unit is not where he wants it to be. And I think that is something that Red Bull will have to work on. But I think that Max will get less upset about this once his car allows him to actually finish a race. So there's that. Moving on, of course, to Lewis Hamilton. He had his first Ferrari podium. Finally, it took him more than a year, which Lewis Hamilton is having fun, and that's great for him. He said it on the radio. He's finally having fun doing racing, and that's also one of the things that Formula One has been looking for. Are these new regulations perfect? No, far from it. But we did see the potential this week of what good things we can see throughout the season. It's just we want it to be a little bit more of like everybody doing the same thing and not just Ferrari v Mercedes. Lewis's podium, his 10th podium in Shanghai, is a record for that track. So that is throughout his career, Lewis has had some of the most success that he has had in China. So that is great. Obviously, also Charles Leclerc for being part of all that scrapping. He finished in P4. That was a solid performance from him. Anything that Ferrari is doing towards the top of the points, Ferrari is happy with, and it means that they're not engineering themselves into oblivion or strategizing themselves into oblivion. Though, we all heard Plan C and did hear Plan C for combat, and also Plan C. How many other freaking plans do they have in their back pocket? Because we all know that Ferrari has 85 plans for a 14-lap race. But anyway, also to move through who else impressed, I have really been impressed by Ollie Bearman. I know obviously Ollie Bearman is in a bit of a precarious situation where he has 10 penalty points. So he has to drive exceptionally clean right now. And he has been doing very well with that so far. He started the race P5. He finished the race P5. He is also currently P5 in the championship in a Haas. So that really goes to show you just how much the entire grid has basically had this massive reset. And we'll talk about the disappointments in a minute. But you know, we knew going into Ollie's Formula One career that he has some of the most potential of all the rookies on the grid, right up there with, you know, Kimi Antonelli, who's, you know, clearly in a very different car than Ollie is. But I like what I'm seeing out of Ollie Bearman. I like that he is racing clean and racing well and has been given the opportunity to do so. And I think that this might be a breakout year for, at the very least, his side of the Haas garage. Remains to be seen about the other side, but we'll get there in a minute. And I can't believe I'm talking about this because since when do we ever talk about Alpine on this podcast? Alpine had a really great day in China in that Grand Prix race. Pierre Gasly finished P6, Franco Colapinto finished P10. This was Franco's first points with Alpine since he joined the team. This is not his first points in Formula One. He had that in Baku in 2024 with Williams after he replaced Logan Sargent midway through the season. And of course, we have to talk about the hug. And after qualifying, when Flavio Briatore hugged Franco Colapinto, and surprise, surprise, they had a good weekend. It's almost like when you're not trying to mentally destroy and berate your drivers, they will have better performances than, you know, when you make them want to, you know, unalive themselves, so to speak. I actually had that note written out. It was like, if Franco podiums, then you know, Flavio Briatore is going to have to, you know, learn a lesson about how to be very nice to his drivers in order to get the best performances from him. Now, will he learn that lesson from a double points finish this weekend? No, but it's nice to think about, and it's nice for Alpine to have at the very least one good day. And that one good day, they have 10 points right now in 2026. That's more than they scored in the last 13 races of 2025 from Silverstone to Abu Dhabi. So clearly they're doing a little bit better. Obviously moving from a Renault power unit, RIP Renault, to the Mercedes power unit. That will help. Having time to have that experience in the offseason for Franco is really big. Pierre Gasly is just Pierre Gasly. Like, are we worried about him? Not really, no. So that was really great to see, especially since, you know, he did bop wheels with Esteban Ocon and, you know, came away with a little bit of damage. But fortunately, that damage wasn't enough to keep him out of the points. So it was a really great day for Alpine. And speaking of finishing in the points, Carlos Sainz in the tractor that is the Williams finished in P9. And I think that's phenomenal. And one of the other things that I really liked about the new enhanced data tracker that we have from Apple TV, I can't believe I'm talking nice things about Apple TV still, is not only does it have, you know, where the drivers are on track, what their times are, but it also has like things of note for each lap, but it also has the transcripts of more radio broadcasts than we get from the actual broadcasts on TV. So there was one radio message from Carlos to the engineers, they didn't broadcast on TV, of Carlos being like, hey, it's really tricky, but if we try pitting here, we might be able to do X, Y, and Z. And I really enjoyed that Carlos is still pitching strategy to the engineers from the car all race long. He is going to make a phenomenal race engineer once he decides to retire from motor racing, which will probably not happen for like a very long time. I mean, look at what his dad is still doing in rallying. And of course, he recovered for the fact that Alex Albon could not start the race, which, like I said, we're going to talk about reliability in a second. But considering where Williams is now, and obviously Williams is not where they want to be, but this is still like glimmers of hope that they could steal points here and there, especially when you have so many reliability issues. And that is the biggest portion of my who disappointed section, is all just reliability. Arvid Lindblad, I was shocked he actually finished that race because his car was bad all weekend and he was, you know, spinning and there was, you know, engine issues and all that stuff. So the fact that he managed to finish the race, even though it was out of the points, good for him. I think that really shows his capability as a driver. I know it's really, too soon to tell of, is he another, future world champion? But Arvid Lindblad is doing what he can with a car that is not necessarily as reliable as Red Bull and the Racing Bulls hopes. And now McLaren. Let's talk about them for a minute. Do I feel sad? No. This was McLaren's first double do not start since the 2005 United States Grand Prix. And if you don't know what happened at the 2005 United States Grand Prix, that race was one of the most ridiculous races in the history of the sport and probably the history of motor racing, and also did a serious amount of damage and set back motorsport in the United States for a couple decades before the, before the Circuit of the Americas opened and before the Drive to Survive era of the sport. But in 2005, the McLarens did not start the race on purpose because their tires would not have supported their cars and it would have been very dangerous. This time, they did not start due to different electrical issues in their cars. Lando didn't even make it to the grid about a half hour before lights out, the cars go and they take their first lap on track and they go out to the grid and then they get set up on the grid. Lando didn't do that, Oscar did. But then Oscar was pushed off before lights out. So Oscar also did not participate in the race. And the last time McLaren as a team has had a single driver have consecutive do not starts before Oscar was Bruce McLaren of the McLaren name back in 1969. I think they said on the broadcast it was the United States and Mexico back to back. Oscar actually, and I don't know if you have noticed this, has not completed a Grand Prix racing lap yet this season, which is bananas for the reigning Constructors champions. Do I feel bad about it? No. Do I feel bad for Oscar? Absolutely. But anything that happens to the reigning Constructors champions that is bad, oh no, too bad, so sad. Anyway, Oscar, the only experience in this car that Oscar has had so far in a racing lap has been these 19 sprint laps from the sprint race on Friday. It was Friday for me where I lived. It was Saturday in China when it was raced, but you know what I mean. So, speaking of reliability issues, Gabriel Bortoleto in the Audi, his car was also pushed off the grid before lights out. Alex Albon was planning on a pit lane start anyway, but had a hydraulics issue that meant he couldn't start the race. Max obviously had a gearbox issue during the race that could have led to a very dicey safety car late if he had to pull off on track, but he had just enough energy in the car left to make it back to the pit lane. And if you are a very upset Max Verstappen fan, like Max Verstappen is also, that his car is not doing what he wants it to do, and you miss hearing the Dutch and Austrian national anthems back to back, you should tune in to the F1 Academy races from the Chinese Grand Prix, because we did have the Dutch and Austrian national anthems back to back in those two races. Full reaction to come, probably will be out either Monday or Tuesday. You'll be listening to this on Monday if you listen to this as soon as it drops. It might be out on Tuesday, depends on how talked out I get. But the F1 Academy weekend was very exciting, and I thought it was pretty funny that we did hear the Max Verstappen back-to-back anthems through two of the drivers that won. So know that is your teaser about F1 Academy if you have not seen those results yet. And then, of course, Aston Martin is still a reliability mess. And I mean, even less than a reliability, it's the cars are trying to break their drivers' hands off. Now, Lance Stroll beached himself, which, oops, Lance Stroll, that happens. Fernando Alonso had to retire after 32 laps because the vibrations in his car were numbing his hands so badly, which you need to have feeling in your hands when you're driving a race car 150 to 200 miles an hour, very fast on track, with a lot of other cars driving very fast on track. And the fact that there's cockpit video of Fernando taking his hands on the wheel and shaking them out so he can get that feeling, and that's just insane. Like, that's so bad. Can't have that. Now, Aston Martin is hoping, they obviously these 2 weeks that they have off are going to be a blessed miracle for them, and they are going to Japan, which obviously is Honda's home base, and they are hoping to have some upgrades that will at the very least help make the drivers not have nerve damage. They're not going to be fast, but at least they won't be breaking the driver's hands off. And now to wrap up who disappointed, I also wanted to point out specifically Esteban Ocon. He has really not been lighting it up at Haas since he joined the team, which is kind of unfortunate because we know the kind of driver that he is. And the fact that Ollie Bearman is doing so much better with so much less experience means that Esteban is I'm not saying he's going to be in danger of losing his race seat not mid-season. I'm not going to say obviously not mid-season because these things do still happen, but it's not looking great for him and for his longevity in Formula One. So he's got some work to do. And, yes, Haas is an Italian team in an American hat, but we want to see good for the American teams. And, the other American team is still trying to figure out how to not break their car when it just drives normally. So, Cadillac has even more work to do. Cadillac did beat one driver. Bottas did not finish dead last next to Sergio Perez, who did finish last. At least they made it to the end of the race. I'll give them that, but still, it is early days for Cadillac, and we should not really be really looking for success out of them now, even though I was pretty optimistic in the Cadillac primer that I put together. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Cadillac, you can do that. That is, I think, linked in the description. Now, let's talk about the driver standings real quick. Right now, obviously, George Russell is in the lead of the Drivers' Championship standings. He has 51 points. Kimi Antonelli is 4 points behind with 47 points. Charles Leclerc has 34 points in P3, and Lewis is 1 point behind Charles with 33 points. And then, rounding out the top 5 is our boy Ollie Bearman. He has 17 points, which really tells you how many points the two leading teams have compared to pretty much everyone else. So that is going to be something to look out for. Obviously, we can only hope that the Red Bulls are going to throw themselves into the mix. And speaking of how Red Bull is doing, obviously they don't have a driver in the top 5 right now. And from the constructors' standing standpoint, Mercedes is in the lead. They almost have 100 points after 2 races. That is a lot of points. They have 98 points right now. Ferrari has 67 points in P2. McLaren has 18 points in P3, which is clearly a steep drop off. And that's what happens when you have 2 drivers who can't participate in the race because their car sucks. Now, Haas is sitting in P4. I don't know if Haas has ever sniffed at P4 in the Constructors' Championship, but that's where they are now, ahead of Red Bull, who has 12 points, and they are in P5. So the Constructors' standings this year, we might see some significant changes into the midfield. I don't think the upper portion is going to change that much. I do think that Red Bull will figure things out sooner rather than later. Obviously, we have the F1 spring break coming up in April because we don't have the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix anymore, which if you have missed the cancellation and the implications behind the cancellation, I break all of that down. I did a little bit of an emergency episode on Saturday that is also linked down in the description for you to enjoy. And yeah, so that a lot of teams are going to have a lot of work to do during the surprise spring break portion of the schedule, shall we say. And it will, like I said in that episode breaking down the cancellations and what they mean for the season, this is, I think that we're really going to see potentially a hard reset once we get back to Miami. And I also said in that episode, Miami is not really where you want to have your brand new fresh start, but that's what we're going with. So we'll see. Now, let's break down my predictions for the Chinese Grand Prix. For sprint pole, I picked Kimi. It was George. I flipped them. It was wrong. I feel bad about it. In the sprint podium, I had Kimi, Charles, and Lewis. It was George, Charles, and Lewis. So I was off by one driver. In P8, I had Nico Hülkenberg, who didn't have the greatest of weekends, but I still like what I'm seeing out of Audi when the car is able to run, and Gabriel Bortoletto isn't just stuck in the garage. And it was Ollie Bearman. That was the other point that he was able to pick up this weekend. For the Grand Prix, like I said, I flipped Kimi and George, so I picked George for the Grand Prix. It was Kimi. For the podium, I had Charles, George, Max. Clearly incorrect. It was Kimi, George, and Lewis. Oops. In P10, I picked Alex Albon, who did not even participate in the race, and we know that it was actually Franco Colapinto. Now, for my biggest surprise, I said it was going to be a good sprint weekend, and shockingly, it was. I still don't even know how that happened, but I didn't hate it. And for who's going to do a dumb, I said that the battery issues were going to cause problems. And by battery, I do mean I'm gonna give myself a win on this because reliability and electrical issues were the name of the game. And oops, I was correct though. Final thoughts before we wrap this up. I was pleasantly surprised by how entertained I was during this race weekend. Like I said, I still have a little bit of issues with how overtaking works / doesn't in this new regulation, but I do think that we are, like, if we can have races like these where we have this intrigue and we have this, like, obviously Kimi scampered off and went out into the sunset, though not as out to the sunset that we've seen from like the likes of like Lewis in his heyday, Max in 2023, sometimes Lando and Oscar last year. So it's still keeping it a little close. I'm still keeping an eye on the drivers getting lapped, which we didn't really have that much of an issue of drivers getting lapped to the extent of seeing drivers in the points getting lapped, which is something that I did notice when I did my 2016 rewatch, where I don't love points finishers being overtaken by the race leader. That's just not my favorite thing, and I think that we might be a little bit close to that, which we'll see. But reliability is the biggest question. And when are we going to get 22 race finishers in a 22 race starting race? Whatever, you know what I mean? I'm tired. It's been a very long weekend. And like I said, teams are going to be working on a lot of this during the spring break in April, which could F1 have snuck in a replacement race? I mean, clearly not, because they're not going to, but oops. Anyway, moving on to our off-track moment of the weekend, I think that it has to be when Kimi Antonelli was announced as Kimi Räikkönen on the podium during the podium ceremony, which I actually missed because it was almost 2:00 in the morning when the podium ceremony happened, and I was very, very tired and very ready to go to bed. But I think that was pretty funny and a pretty big oops. And Kimi Räikkönen has not raced in Formula One in multiple years. Like, somebody should have checked that before they handed that little piece of script off to the PA announcer. Now, up next, we have a week off, and then Formula One is back on in Japan. Those predictions will be out on probably about Wednesday the 25th, depending on my life choices, but it'll probably be out around then. Like I said, we will have a full F1 Academy race weekend reaction episode out at some point this week. Soon. TBD, whenever I get around to recording it, and then it will be up. But the F1 Academy weekend, if you have not yet had a chance to watch, go to their YouTube channel, watch the race highlights, or just watch the race replays. They're all there. They're available. You should watch them. They were actually pretty entertaining. And yeah, I think that's all I have for you guys for this episode. Thanks for going off track with me, and I will see you in the next one.